My name is Peter Montgomery, and rational thought was once my closest ally. I never believed in ghosts or curses. I dismissed every spine-chilling rumor as the product of overactive imaginations. That mindset changed after I inherited my grandfather, Theodore's sprawling Victorian estate. The house, a maze of creaking corridors and dusty rooms, had a single place no one dared to enter: the basement. Grandpa used to mutter warnings under his breath about that lower level, his voice trembling with an uncharacteristic dread. Naturally, I assumed it was just a story to keep me from rummaging around. Everything changed the day I finally summoned the courage to venture downstairs. The rickety steps groaned under my weight as I descended into the murk. The faint scent of mildew filled my nostrils, and a single dangling light bulb flickered sporadically, casting long, twitching shadows across the stone walls. My flashlight beam caught spiderwebs as thick as rope, and I caught myself shuddering at the idea of anything lurking behind them. At first, the room appeared little more than a musty storage space, cluttered with rusted shelves and ancient trunks. Then, I noticed a hidden alcove carved into the far wall. Within that alcove stood a wooden statue. The figure was a woman, with her face contorted in a silent scream. Intricate carvings suggested immense craftsmanship, yet there was something unsettling about her hollow eyes. My initial instinct was to brush it off as an odd piece of antique art. As I reached out to touch it, I felt a sudden chill race down my spine. The temperature plummeted, and the light bulb dimmed, as though it were suffocating. I jumped back, heart hammering in my chest. Then, to my shock, the statue's head tilted ever so slightly, as if acknowledging my presence. Rattled, but determined, I told myself it was just my imagination. I spent the next week trying to fix up the rest of the house, to prepare it for sale, but every time I passed the basement door, I swore I heard faint knocking noises. One night, exhaustion got the better of me, and I fell asleep in the study. That's when I first dreamt of her. She stood at the foot of my grandfather's old desk, her wooden limbs creaking as she moved. Her carved eyes bore into mine with unnerving intensity, and I woke up gasping for air, covered in sweat. The next morning, I resolved to remove the statue. I marched downstairs, but my boldness evaporated as soon as I reached the alcove. The statue had shifted position, now angled toward the staircase. I rationalized it as a trick of my memory. Gathering my courage, I lifted the statue and carried it outside, dumping it by the curb. Feeling triumphant, I locked up and tried to move on. Yet that night, I was woken by the unmistakable sound of creaking floorboards. I rushed into the hallway and stared in horror. Muddy footprints led from the front door all the way to the basement, ending at the locked door. Terrified, I called my best friend, Caroline Miller, pleading for help. She came over armed with skepticism, but the moment she stepped into the house, her bravado wavered. We heard loud scraping noises beneath our feet, like fingernails digging into concrete. When we flung the basement door open, the statue was back in the alcove, its hollow eyes glaring at us. Caroline, pale as a sheet, muttered that we had to destroy it. We doused the statue in gasoline outside and lit a match. Flames devoured the wood, crackling with eerie ferocity. For a fleeting second, I thought I heard a pained cry echo through the yard. Once the fire died, only blackened ash remained. Believing the nightmare over, Caroline left, and I collapsed onto my bed, exhausted. However, that very night, I awoke to the smell of burning wood drifting through the house. I stumbled into the hallway, eyes stinging from smoke, and there it stood, the statue, fully intact, a silent sentinel in the darkness. Realization sank in like a weight in my gut. This was no ordinary artifact. It was bound to the house and to me by some unseen force. My only recourse was to flee. I sold the estate for far less than it was worth, but even after moving across the country, I can still hear those basement knocks echoing in my dreams. The statue's memory haunts me, lurking in every shadowy corner of my mind. reminding me of one undeniable truth. Once something sinister claims your soul, it may never let go. I have learned one final lesson from that accursed basement. The darkest horrors are not the ones we see on movie screens, but the ones we invite into our homes. No matter how far I run, I can sense its presence, creeping in the corners of my vision and lingering in the quiet moments before sleep. And if you ever find yourself tempted by the hidden spaces beneath old houses, remember my warning. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. My name is Oliver Henderson, and I've always prided myself on being a man of science. I approach everything logically, dismissing talk of hauntings or possessions as figments of overactive imaginations. That was before I purchased an old craftsman-style home with a notorious basement, said to be alive with secrets. Locals whispered that a family vanished there decades ago, leaving behind only cryptic, blood-stained letters. I chalked it up to urban legend until I discovered the antique mirror. The mirror was buried under dusty tarps in a corner of the basement. Its gilt frame, though tarnished, still exuded a strange elegance. I was renovating the house to sell, and the moment I caught my reflection in that mirror, something felt off. My eyes seemed darker, as though a shadow hovered behind my pupils. I brushed off the chill that raced through me, attributing it to the basement's perpetual dampness. Over the next few days, I noticed odd occurrences. Tools I'd left neatly stacked on my workbench would be scattered in the morning. The sound of skittering footsteps echoed through the vents late at night. Convinced it was a rodent problem, I set traps, but they remained empty. One evening, I wandered downstairs, guided by an eerie sense that something was calling me. I found myself standing before the mirror again, transfixed by a subtle distortion in the glass. My reflection was there yet it blinked a split second after I did. Disturbed, I covered the mirror with a sheet. Hours later, I shot awake to the basement door, creaking open on its own. The mirror's corner peeked out from beneath the sheet, as though someone or something had tugged at it. The basement light flickered, revealing a dim silhouette behind me in the reflection. I whirled around, heart pounding, but the basement was empty. Desperate to regain a sense of control, I invited my friend, Matthew Holmes, to come over and help me move the mirror to the trash. Matthew, a practical man, shrugged off my concerns until he spotted a faint handprint on the glass on the inside. He pressed his palm against it and recoiled. "It's warm," he whispered, eyes wide. I felt a jolt of adrenaline as the mirror's surface began to ripple, distorting our reflections into twisted shapes. We both stumbled backward, nearly toppling over paint cans and rickety shelves. Fearing I was losing my mind, I researched the house's history. According to local archives, the family that vanished had reported seeing strange images in reflective surfaces, culminating in their mysterious disappearance. Some neighbors claimed they simply ran away, but a more sinister rumor circulated. The basement mirror served as a gateway for a malevolent presence, trapping souls inside its reflective prison. I tried smashing it with a sledgehammer. The moment the metal struck the glass, a high-pitched wail reverberated through the basement. My ears rang painfully, and for an instant, I saw a multitude of faces screaming just beneath the surface. Cracks spiderwebbed across the mirror, but it remained unbroken. Terrified, Matthew and I retreated upstairs. We slept with the lights on, each haunted by fleeting glimpses of our distorted reflections in every window or shiny surface. When morning arrived, I mustered the courage to return. The mirror was whole again, not a single scratch marring its surface. Resigned, I covered it, boarded up the basement, and listed the property for sale. Within a week, an eager buyer offered cash. Ignoring my vague warnings about the home's condition, I signed the papers, hoping to be free of the nightmares. Yet freedom proved elusive, even in my new apartment. I sometimes catch my reflection doing things I'm not doing, blinking when I'm staring, smiling when my lips are set in a frown. The faint sound of that basement door creaking open echoes in my dreams. Though I tell myself it's just an overworked imagination, deep down I know the truth. Once you've looked into that mirror, it never truly lets go of you. If you ever sense that your reflection isn't quite matching your movements, heed my caution that next time you see your eyes blink without you, it might already be too late. I'm Sophia Bryant, a travel nurse with a habit of relocating every few months. My job takes me to distant towns where I rent old houses for cheap. The latest property was a turn-of-a-century bungalow with a dank, unfinished basement. The landlord, Mr. Russell, warned me it had plumbing issues. He insisted the pipes made odd sounds sometimes, but it was nothing serious. Eager to save money, I signed the lease without a second thought. The first week passed uneventfully, although I noticed a persistent drip coming from the basement. Late one night, I grabbed a flashlight and ventured downstairs, determined to twist a valve or tighten a bolt. The overhead bulb flickered, bathing the cinder block walls in a sickly yellow glow. The drip echoed louder than expected, as though amplified by a hollow chamber behind the walls. I followed the sound until I found a series of rusty pipes snaking around a corner. Something was off. Each drip felt almost deliberate, like a steady, rhythmic pulse. I reached out to tighten a valve, and that's when I heard a soft whisper right behind me. My breath caught in my throat. At first I thought I was imagining things, but the whisper repeated, an unintelligible murmur that sounded both desperate and angry. A chill crawled up my spine, and I scrambled back upstairs. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bedroom, convincing myself I was just tired. The next day, I confronted Mr. Russell. He brushed off my concerns, insisting the pipes occasionally trapped air, causing strange noises. Unconvinced but lacking evidence, I returned home. That evening, as I cooked dinner, the sink sputtered violently, spewing out black water. The stench was foul, reminiscent of rotting garbage. I shut off the faucet and gagged, noticing a faint, echoing whisper again. My curiosity warred with my fear, and finally, I grabbed my phone to record any unusual sounds. Armed with my phone's flashlight and recording app, I descended the creaking steps. The damp air enveloped me like a cold hand. I approached the same spot as before, and again, I heard soft murmurs. My phone captured words, this time garbled pleas and raspy sighs. Heart pounding, I shone the light along the pipes. One section near the floor looked corroded, so I gently tapped it. The metal rang hollow. With trembling hands, I pried loose a small panel and nearly dropped my phone in shock. Behind it lay a narrow space where human bones were stuffed haphazardly, smeared with rust and age. The whispers grew louder, as if I had awakened something. My mind raced. Were these remains from some long-forgotten crime? Who put them there? I tried calling the police, but my phone died inexplicably. Battery drained from full to zero in seconds. Panic seized me, and I fled upstairs, slamming the door behind me. That night, the pipes rattled like mad, banging and clanging in a frenzy. Amid the noise, I heard a voice, clear as day. Free me. I barely slept. By dawn, I had decided to leave, no matter the penalty for breaking my lease. I tossed my belongings into my car and prepared to drive off. As I pulled away, I saw Mr. Russell standing on the sidewalk, staring at me with a knowing smirk. It was then I realized he was somehow involved, or at least aware. I didn't stick around to find out more. I drove until my tank hit empty, checking my rearview mirror constantly, half expecting to see him chasing me. Weeks later, in a new city, I sometimes still hear those whispers at night. It's as if the pipes left an imprint on my psyche, an echo that refuses to fade. No matter where I go, the memory of that cramped hollow space filled with bones haunts me. I'm plagued by one gnawing fear. Maybe whatever was behind those walls latched onto me when I discovered its grave. If you ever hear faint voices emanating from your home's plumbing, take heed. Some secrets are better left undisturbed, lest they follow you long after you've fled. My name is Charlotte Hayes, and I inherited an old colonial house from my estranged aunt, Madeline. We barely spoke, so her decision to leave me the property was unexpected. The structure stood at the edge of a small town, surrounded by towering oaks. Locals whispered about my aunt's eccentricities, how she wandered the streets at night, muttering about shadows and ghosts. I dismissed it all as idle gossip, figuring I could at least sell the place for a tidy sum. Upon arrival, the house seemed ordinary enough, though it reeked of neglect. My first step inside kicked up a swirl of dust motes glinting in the sunlight. An uneasy feeling gnawed at me like being watched. I shrugged it off and set about exploring. Eventually, I noticed a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. It creaked open to reveal a steep, narrow staircase leading to a cramped cellar. The overhead bulb was burnt out, so I used my phone's flashlight. The cellar walls were lined with stone, and the floor felt oddly hollow in places. As I paced around, I heard a soft scraping noise, like nails on wood. It echoed below me, muffled but insistent. My heart pounded, but I couldn't pinpoint the source. I convinced myself it was just an animal trapped under the floor. Over the next few days, the scraping grew louder. Sometimes, it sounded like urgent scratching. Other times, like a slow, methodical clawing. At night, I swore I heard hushed voices drifting through the vents, calling my name in slurred tones. Desperate for answers, I invited a local handyman named Jackson Porter to inspect the cellar. As he tapped along the boards, one section gave way with a crack. Underneath lay a shallow pit, where we found old photographs and handwritten letters. The photos depicted my aunt in her youth, standing with shadowy figures whose faces were smudged beyond recognition. Each letter hinted at and failed attempts to contact the dead. One paragraph read, "The shadows hunger. They grow restless, reaching from beneath. I must feed them, or they will consume me instead." A gust of air blew through the cellar, extinguishing the lone flashlight we'd set on a shelf. The temperature plummeted. In the dark, Jackson and I heard frantic scratching directly beneath our feet. Then came a low growl. Fear seized me, and I scrambled upstairs. Jackson, braver than I, lingered just long enough to slam the trapdoor behind us. Neither of us spoke a word about what we'd heard. The haunted look in his eyes told me he felt it too. That night I tried to sleep, but the voices wouldn't stop. They urged me to open the trapdoor and come back down. The floorboards groaned as though something was pushing up from beneath, straining to break through. I could practically sense the shadows pooling under my bed. In a panic, I fled to the living room, intending to wait out the night in an armchair. But the scratching followed me there, reverberating through the walls. By dawn, I was packed. I told Jackson he could keep the house if he wanted, though his hollow gaze suggested he was just as terrified as I was. I left without signing any papers or tidying up, convinced that nothing would quell the malevolent presence lurking under those boards. Driving away, I felt a mix of shame and relief, leaving behind my aunt's legacy of darkness. Occasionally, I dream of that cellar, hearing the scraping and the voices calling my name. I wonder if those shadows found another victim, or if they still bide their time beneath rotted planks, waiting for someone foolish enough to trespass. If you ever hear persistent scratching from beneath the floor, heed my tale. Some hungers, once awakened, can never be sated. I'm Nathaniel Collins, a home inspector by trade. People hire me to evaluate old properties, ensuring they're safe to inhabit or renovate. Over the years, I've grown numb to rotted timber and faulty wiring, but nothing prepared me for the Bradshaw property, a dilapidated mansion rumored to have been abandoned mid-renovation. When I arrived, the agent handed me a skeleton key and warned me about the basement's unusual design. Eager to finish the job, I made my way inside, methodically jotting notes on peeling wallpaper and creaking floors. Everything seemed relatively straightforward until I descended into the basement. The space was cavernous, illuminated by a few dangling bulbs swaying gently in a draft. My footsteps echoed ominously on the concrete floor. Tucked away in the far corner was a large iron door with no visible handle on the outside. Its surface was etched with bizarre symbols, spirals, and crosses that made my skin crawl. Despite my best professional detachment, I felt an unshakable foreboding. I continued my inspection, noticing an odd draft seeping through the door's edges. Suddenly, I heard a faint clang, like metal scraping against stone. Leaning in closer, I realized the sound came from behind the iron barrier. My pulse quickened. My first instinct was to leave, but curiosity won out. I fumbled with the skeleton key, though there was no keyhole in sight. Frustrated, I pushed my shoulder against the door. To my shock, it nudged open, revealing a pitch-black corridor. I aimed my flashlight down the corridor, spotting damp brick walls lined with iron rings. Chains clinked softly, as if recently disturbed. Every step I took reverberated with a metallic echo. The air felt heavy, like wading through invisible sludge. Farther in, I discovered a small chamber containing an altar. On it rested a tattered notebook, filled with unsteady handwriting. One passage read, "The ones behind the door must remain locked away. They feed on fear and blood. Do not open it." My stomach lurched. A sudden slam behind me made me spin around. The iron door had swung shut on its own. My flashlight flickered, and in its intermittent glow, I glimpsed a shifting shape in the corner, something tall, contorted, with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. It moved closer, dragging a chain behind it. My throat went dry. I heard ragged breathing and realized it wasn't mine. Desperate, I yanked the door open just enough to squeeze through. A guttural hiss echoed from the chamber, sending my heart racing. Once back in the main basement, I locked the iron door, jamming a nearby metal rod through the latch. My mind reeled with questions. Had someone or something been imprisoned here? Was it still trapped? I abandoned the rest of the inspection, sprinting to the surface. The listing agent found me pale and shaking, but I gave no explanation. I knew no one would believe me. In the following days, I replayed the scene in my mind, haunted by the memory of those glowing eyes. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, an illusion born of stress. Yet even now, I dream of the corridor and the clinking chains. Each time, the door stands ajar, that thing waiting just beyond the threshold. The nightmares feel so real. I sometimes wake up expecting to hear metal scraping outside my bedroom. I've refused every job since. Word has spread that I ran from the Bradshaw property in terror, but rumors don't matter to me anymore. I'd rather be considered a coward than risk unleashing whatever lurks behind that iron door. If you ever stumble upon a locked entrance in a forgotten basement, remember this cautionary tale. Some doors are meant to stay sealed, for what lies behind them hungers for a freedom that should never be granted. I'm Daphne, and all my life I'd been drawn to the silent majesty of Redwood Vale. Its towering trunks and fragrant needles always offered solace until the night I discovered a hidden ritual site deep within its shadows. My mother used to say I had a knack for finding trouble, but I never imagined how right she'd be. One moonlit evening, I hiked beyond the usual trails, lured by a faint humming that seemed both soothing and sinister. The deeper I ventured, the older the trees became, their bark scarred by deep gashes. I spotted strange symbols etched into the wood, and with each step forward, my apprehension grew. Still, I pressed on, curiosity overriding caution. I eventually stumbled upon an overgrown clearing where robed figures formed a circle around a colossal statue carved from a single redwood trunk. The statue portrayed a woman with elongated limbs, her expression twisted in agony. My heart fluttered in disbelief as I watched the group sway in unison, their humming vibrating the still night air. The leader stepped forward, hands raised toward the statue's face. With a trembling voice, they invoked a name I didn't recognize, a name that pulsed in my mind like a heartbeat. The statue's carved eyes then glowed faintly, and a creeping unease took hold of me. I should have turned and run, but I was spellbound, locked in place by dread and fascination. Suddenly, the humming escalated into a chorus of discordant notes. The statue's wooden surface rippled, as if alive. A shrill crack echoed through the clearing, and the statue's torso split open, revealing a hollow interior. From this cavity emerged a vile stench of decay, and something writhed inside, scraping against the wood in desperate fury. The robed figures reached into the opening, each withdrawing a handful of writhing, glistening centipedes. I froze, nausea gripping my insides. One by one, they placed the centipedes onto their tongues before swallowing them whole. The leader turned toward me, as though sensing my presence, and I realized my horrific mistake. I had intruded upon a forbidden communion. In a surge of panic, I attempted to step back, but my foot caught on a route. I crashed to the ground, the sound echoing in the hushed clearing. The robed figures whipped around, and their murmuring gave way to frantic whispers. My mind screamed at me to flee, but adrenaline pinned me in place. Then the leader raised a staff, and a scorching red light erupted from its tip, illuminating the entire clearing. A wave of heat slammed into me, and the statue's eyes blazed like embers. I felt an immense pressure building in my chest, making it impossible to breathe. The robed assembly advanced, arms outstretched, as if beckoning me to join their ghastly rite. My vision blurred, spots dancing before my eyes. I knew I had only seconds to break free. Summoning every ounce of courage, I rolled to my knees and bolted into the darkness. The forest seemed to conspire against me. Roots snagged my ankles, branches tore at my skin. Behind me, the chanting resumed, louder and more urgent. My lungs burned as I sprinted through the maze of ancient trunks, the leader's voice echoing through the shadows, promising retribution. At last I spotted a faint glow from my abandoned campsite. I lunged for the lantern, nearly collapsing. In relief, the chanting faded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself watched me leave, disappointed I had escaped. Even now, I wake in cold sweats, recalling the red glow, the splitting wood, and the unholy communion. I've learned that Redwood Vale holds a dark heartbeat, one that resonates with those who dare venture too far. I left that cursed clearing, but the memory of it still clings to me like sap, a sticky reminder that some secrets are better left buried in the silence of the trees. My name is Lawrence, and I was a skeptic before I stepped into the cursed reaches of Ravenshade Woods. People in town warned me about sinister rites carried out under the old oaks, but I dismissed them as tall tales. I was a historian, after all, accustomed to separating fact from folklore. How wrong I was. I ventured in alone, armed with historical texts and a stubborn disbelief. The forest canopy was so dense that daylight struggled to penetrate, rendering the atmosphere dim even at noon. The air was thick, smelling of damp earth and something sulphurous. I pressed on, each footstep accompanied by the soft rustle of dead leaves and the distant caw of a lone crow. After hours of trudging, I discovered a stone archway engraved with cryptic symbols. This structure matched old records describing a gateway used in secret druidic rituals centuries ago. My heart raced with a mix of excitement and trepidation. I carefully stepped beneath the arch. The temperature dropped instantly, and a dense fog materialized around me as if summoned by unseen hands. In the clearing beyond, I found a circle of stones arranged around a crude altar. Faded runes marked each stone's surface, radiating an unsettling energy I couldn't explain. As I approached, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the sunlight, leaving me enveloped in shadow. Then I heard a low, rhythmic chant from somewhere, just beyond the fog. I squinted, trying to make out silhouettes in the gloom. Slowly, hooded figures emerged from the tree line, their voices weaving an ominous lullaby. One by one, they encircled the altar, each holding a torch whose flame burned a deep, unnatural green. The color flickered across their faces, revealing hollow cheeks and eyes that sparkled with deranged fervor. They placed their torches in iron brackets, illuminating an ancient tome resting atop the altar. The tome's cover was made of a leathery material I dared not identify. My skepticism warred with an instinctive dread as I crept closer. The lead figure opened the book, finger tracing lines of text in a language I couldn't recognize. The chanting intensified, each syllable hammering into my mind. Suddenly, the circle parted to reveal an emaciated creature shackled to a wooden stake. Its sunken eyes darted frantically, pleading for mercy. My stomach churned at the sight of raw wounds covering its body. Without hesitation, the lead figure plunged a dagger into the creature's chest. A tortured scream pierced the night, and the chanting surged to a fevered pitch. To my horror, the blood that gushed from the creature's wound glowed an eerie green, matching the torchlight. The ground trembled, and an otherworldly roar echoed through the clearing. The shackled being collapsed, but its lifeblood seeped into the altar, making the runes burn with a flickering luminescence. I realized I was witnessing an ancient sacrifice meant to rouse something best left dormant. Unable to remain silent, I let out an involuntary gasp. Every hooded head snapped toward me. The chanting ceased, replaced by an unnerving silence. My heart thundered in my chest as they advanced, torches raised. I turned and sprinted into the fog, branches whipping my face. I could still hear their footsteps pounding behind me, closing in like a pack of wolves. I didn't stop running until I burst through the archway again. The air warmed, and the fog lifted as if a veil had been removed. Gasping for breath, I stumbled onto the main trail. Though I escaped with my life, my nights remain haunted by green flames and unholy chants. I abandoned my skepticism that Daysome legends, I learned, are grounded in nightmarish truths. I left the forest with more questions than answers. But the terror in my dreams tells me that knowledge sometimes comes at a horrifying cost. My name is Harris, and if I'd known the price of my ambition, I'd never have filmed that documentary in the heart of Harrowroot Forest. I was desperate for a breakthrough project, and local legends about forbidden ceremonies seemed like the perfect angle. My small crew and I arrived at dusk, camera gear rattling in the back of our van, each of us jittery with a blend of excitement and dread. We followed a narrow, overgrown trail into the forest's depths. The deeper we went, the quieter everything became. No bird calls, no rustling animals, just our own breathing and the crunch of twigs underfoot. The towering pines stood like silent sentinels, blocking out the evening sky. Every so often, I caught a fleeting glimpse of movement among the trees, but when I looked directly, nothing was there. Eventually, we discovered a small clearing, where the ground was littered with withered flowers and charred bits of cloth. It felt like we'd stumbled upon the remnants of a forgotten ceremony. My cameraman, Joel, began filming, panning across the unsettling evidence. Suddenly, a chill breeze swept through, carrying with it the faint echo of distant chanting. The hairs on my neck bristled. Compelled to investigate, we moved toward the sound. Dusk surrendered to night, and the moon's glow pierced the forest canopy in thin, silver ribbons. We paused at the edge of another clearing. There, a large stone circle enclosed a patch of blackened soil. In the center stood a figure draped in ragged robes, arms raised to the heavens. Something about the posture radiated an unearthly menace. With a surge of journalistic zeal, I signaled Joel to record. As soon as we stepped forward, the figure whirled around, A pale face emerged from the hood, a face without eyes, just smooth skin stretched across empty sockets. A rasping sound emanated from its lipless mouth, like an attempt to speak, but forming no coherent words. A wave of dread washed over me, and I realized we had trespassed on something profoundly evil before we could react. The figure dropped to its knees and pounded the ground with both fists. Dark fissures spread across the stone circle, seeping a thick, tar-like substance. The chanting we'd heard earlier grew louder, though no one else was present. It was as if the forest itself had joined the ritual. My crew and I stood paralyzed, cameras rolling, hearts pounding. Then, from within the cracks, twisted vines emerged, writhing as though they possessed a life of their own. They latched onto the robed figure, wrapping around its limbs in a grotesque embrace. To our horror, the figure began to laugh, a shrill, maddening cackle that echoed through the clearing. The vines burrowed into its flesh, and instead of blood, a black sap oozed out, steaming in the cool air. Suddenly, the vines lurched in our direction. Joel was the first to scream. One vine ensnared his leg, dragging him violently across the ground. I yelled for everyone to run, but chaos erupted. Two of my crew bolted back into the forest, while I tried to help Joel free himself. The vine's grip was impossibly strong, and a foul odor emanated from it, a nauseating blend of decay and sulfur. Desperate, I grabbed a nearby rock and hammered at the vine until it slackened its hold. Joel gasped in pain, his ankle, likely, broken. Supporting him, I half-limped, half-dragged him toward the edge of the clearing. Over my shoulder, I saw the robed figure convulsing under the vines, face upturned to the moon. The chanting intensified into a frenzied wail, as if the entire forest was screaming in unison. We escaped into the trees, stumbling over roots and branches until we found the van. The others were already inside, eyes wide with terror. Without a word, we sped away. Later, when I reviewed the footage, it was all static. The camera had failed to record the most horrifying moments. Even so, that night remains etched into my soul, a constant reminder that some stories aren't meant to be told. I learned too late that true evil doesn't always hide in shadows. Sometimes it calls to you, whispering promises you're too eager to hear. I remember how the cold wind pierced my jacket as I trudged deeper into the wilderness with Adam, my longtime friend. The trail was obscure, barely lit by our flickering flashlights. Towering pines blocked the moonlight, casting elongated shadows that seemed to move on their own. We weren't simply camping this time. We had heard rumors of a clandestine group holding a ritual in these woods. Our curiosity outweighed our caution, and so we continued in silence, feeling the weight of the night. I first noticed the footprints near a gnarled oak, prints too large and spaced too closely to belong to any normal walker. They led us onto a narrower path, where we found unsettling clues: melted candle wax hardened over roots, small wooden effigies hanging from branches, and cryptic markings carved into the bark. Each step felt like a silent invitation into a realm we were never meant to enter. Adam and I exchanged uneasy looks, but pressed on. Soon, we reached a clearing bathed in a ghostly glow. In the center stood a crudely fashioned altar made of stone slabs, surrounded by half-burnt black candles. A stagnant odor hung in the air, akin to rotting leaves mixed with something metallic. My heartbeat thumped against my ribcage. We were on the brink of discovering something horrifying, yet some twisted sense of fascination held us captive. My throat felt dry, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from that altar. Suddenly, I saw movement at the edge of the clearing, a line of hooded figures, each grasping a thick wooden staff. They marched in eerie unison, forming a circle around the altar. One figure, taller than the rest, lifted a ceremonial dagger carved with strange symbols. The chanting that followed resonated through the darkness, a guttural melody that rattled my nerves. I wanted to run, but found myself rooted to the spot, paralyzed by dread and awe. As the chant grew louder, the shadows beneath the figures began to writhe, as though they were alive. Adam tugged at my sleeve, signaling that we should leave, but part of me needed to see more to understand the forbidden practice unfolding before my eyes. That was when the tall figure raised its arms, revealing pale, skeletal hands. A wave of cold air struck us, and I saw the candle flames flicker wildly, as though responding to an unseen force. In one terrifying instant, the dagger plunged into a small wooden effigy on the altar. An agonized howl erupted from the circle, echoing through the trees. The effigy snapped open, revealing a blood-soaked scrap of cloth. I realized, with a bolt of horror, that this was no mere performance. This was a summoning, a call to something ancient and malevolent lurking in the shadows. My stomach twisted as I fought the urge to vomit. Suddenly, a piercing cry tore through the night. A monstrous silhouette emerged from the darkness, eyes glowing like embers. It towered over the robed figures, and they dropped to their knees in reverence. My mind reeled at the sight of this abomination, part stag, part decaying human form. Slowly, it turned its gaze toward me. Even from a distance, I felt its hunger, a primal urge that demanded sacrifice. Adam clutched my arm, and I heard his panicked breath. Without warning, the beast lunged forward, snatching one of the acolytes in its jaws. Screams shattered the ritual's rhythm, and the hooded circle dissolved into chaos. Adam and I snapped out of our trance and sprinted back into the woods, branches clawing at our clothes. We fled blindly, fear fueling our every step. Even now, I can still hear that unearthly roar echoing through the pines. I sometimes wake at night, drenched in sweat, convinced it's stalking me still, hungry for another offering. In the aftermath, word of the forest's malevolent presence spread quietly among the locals. Some whispered of cursed land and an ancient spirit that demanded blood. Others dismissed the tales as hysteria. Adam and I never spoke openly about what we witnessed, but the memory grew into a silent wedge between us. My nights became fraught with nightmares, visions of hooded congregants chanting under a pale moon, shadows warping into horrors beyond comprehension. Now, whenever I pass that old trail, I sense a watchful presence lingering among the trees. My flashlight beam reveals nothing but dense foliage, yet I know better. The forest has eyes, and it remembers those who witness its forbidden rites. Though my rational mind urges me to forget, my conscience won't let me ignore the truth. We disrupted something that night, something that thrives on fear, and I fear it may one day call me back. I pray it never finds me, but in my bones, I sense it's only a matter of time. My name is Evelyn, and I once believed no secret was too dark to uncover. That arrogant curiosity led me to a remote forest near Blackwood Creek, where rumors spoke of cryptic gatherings. I packed a bag armed with nothing but a camera and my blind determination. The twisted pines seemed to whisper warnings in the night air as I ventured into the gloom, guided only by the faint hush of distant chanting. I should have turned back the moment I found a scattering of bleached bones near a moss-covered rock. Instead, I pressed on, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Every branch seemed to scratch at my jacket like a bony finger, urging me to reverse course. I told myself it was just my imagination, a side effect of my single-minded pursuit of the unknown. Little did I know, I was stepping into a realm where human eyes rarely dared to linger. I reached a hidden hollow, ringed by ancient oaks. My heart hammered against my chest as I crouched behind a fallen log to observe. In the clearing stood a circle of hooded individuals, their bodies swaying in a rhythmic dance around a central totem carved from a colossal tree trunk. The totem bore a faceless visage with hollow eyes and a gaping mouth, as though perpetually crying out in silent agony. A single red candle flickered at its base. The chanting was low and hypnotic, punctuated by the snapping of twigs. One figure lifted a clay bowl, passing it around as others dipped their hands inside. Through my camera lens, I saw a thick, dark substance coat their fingers. Then they smeared this foul liquid onto the totem's wooden face. The sight made my stomach churn. An unnatural hush descended, and for a moment, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. I nearly gasped aloud when the totem's carved eyes appeared to glisten, as if reacting to the vile offering. My pulse quickened, and I struggled to steady my shaking hands. The hooded assembly sank to their knees, chanting a phrase I couldn't decipher. Waves of cold air rippled through the hollow, sending leaves spiraling upward. I felt an immediate, primal terror. Something beyond my comprehension was about to manifest. Suddenly, the totem's wooden mouth began to move, releasing a guttural moan that resonated through the clearing. My camera slipped from my grip, but I caught it before it hit the ground. The worshippers prostrated themselves, pressing their foreheads into the damp earth. My mind raced as I questioned my own sanity. Could wood truly groan like a living creature? The moan built into a roar, shaking the surrounding trees. As the roar subsided, the lead figure rose and turned directly toward my hiding place. Though I couldn't see their face under the hood, I felt the weight of their gaze. The group pivoted in unison, silent yet menacing. My breath caught in my throat as they began to advance toward the fallen log, slow and deliberate steps crunching on the dried leaves. I realized that witnessing their secret had condemned me. Panic erupted within me, but my legs refused to move. I recalled stories of people vanishing in these woods, their possessions found near strange markings etched into the bark. Now, I feared I would become just another legend to be whispered about in local taverns. Gathering a final burst of courage, I bolted from my hiding spot, clutching my camera like a talisman. The hooded figures broke into a chase. I sprinted blindly, branches tearing at my face, footfalls pounded behind me, closer with every frantic heartbeat. I dared not look back. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows that seemed to warp and shift, guiding me deeper into its clutches. A single misstep sent me tumbling down a slope, smashing my knee against a jagged stone. Pain shot through my leg, but I forced myself up, limping onward as a shrill cry echoed behind me. At last, I stumbled upon an old ranger's cabin. I threw myself against the door, sobbing in relief when it gave way. No one was inside, but I slammed the lock shut and sank to the floor. Through the window, I caught one final glimpse of a hooded figure standing at the tree line, head tilted in silent warning. That night, I vowed never to chase such darkness again. Yet sometimes, under the moon's pale glow, I swear I can still hear that unholy totem's roar. I survived, but the memories cling to me like a curse, reminding me that some doors should remain forever closed. My name is Abigail, and last winter, I took a late-night trip through winding mountain roads. Snow whipped across my windshield, and the temperature gauge dipped well below freezing. My gas tank beeped empty, forcing me to stop at a remote station, labeled Blackwood Fuel. It looked deserted except for a single, faint light inside. Stepping in, I rubbed my gloved hands together, scanning shelves of dusty supplies. A clerk named Jared emerged from a back room. He gave a tight smile, but couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. Something about his eyes said he'd seen too much. While I explained my situation, the lights flickered ominously. He pointed toward a weathered door. "Generators failing," he muttered. "I'll show you the canisters." I followed him, outside into the howling wind. The generator shed stood behind the station, covered in ice and half buried by snow. We pried it open to find empty canisters and a single flashlight flickering in the gloom. Jared cursed under his breath. Suddenly, an odd rumble echoed through the surrounding trees. It sounded like an avalanche, but the ground stayed still. Gripping the flashlight, we hurried back to the station, only to notice strange footprints in the snow leading around the corner. They were large, uneven, as though made by a massive creature dragging its feet. Inside, we locked the doors. The overhead lights sputtered to life one last time, then died completely, leaving us in near darkness. I pulled out my phone, no signal. Jared's radio emitted static. The wind battered the walls, and between gusts, I heard scraping near the front window. My mouth went dry, shining the flashlight. I saw a silhouette pressed against the glass, towering, covered in thick fur, with burning eyes. Its breath fogged the pane, revealing massive fangs. Before I could react, it roared and slammed a clawed hand against the door, rattling the frame. Jared and I retreated behind the counter. We heard it circling the building, each heavy step crunching through snow. Occasionally, it pounded on the walls, testing for weakness. Fear clawed at my mind. Then came a deafening crash. The creature had ripped an air vent loose, and we heard it crawling inside. I nearly screamed, but Jared clamped a hand over my mouth in the flashlight's beam. We spotted a vent cover in the ceiling push upward. A chunk of ice and insulation fell, revealing a massive paw. We scrambled toward a side hallway leading to a storage room. Slamming that door, we barricaded it with shelving. My heart felt like it might explode. A furious snarl reverberated overhead. The metal duct creaked. We braced for the creature to drop on us at any moment. In a desperate move, Jared shattered the small, frosty window to the outside. I climbed through into waist-deep snow, shards of glass scraping my coat. Jared followed, whimpering in pain as he cut his arm. We fled around the station, the flashlight beam bouncing through swirling snow. Near the pumps, my car sat partially buried. We risked everything in a frantic attempt to refuel. The beast roared from somewhere above, knocking loose snow from the station's roof. The nozzle clicked, indicating we'd gotten just enough gas. Leaping into my car, we started the engine. Headlights sliced through the storm as the creature lunged into view, monstrous silhouette with glowing eyes. I floored the accelerator. We plowed through drifts, skidding onto the highway. In the rearview mirror, I glimpsed that hulking form, bounding after us, but gradually it vanished into the blizzard. Even now, I can't shake the memory of those footprints, that ear-splitting roar. Sometimes in winter, when the wind howls, I recall those burning eyes at the window. Blackwood fuel remains a frozen nightmare in my mind, proof that some legends about mountains in the dead of night might just be real. I go by Owen, and I once prided myself on being fearless. Late-night drives had always soothed me, especially through isolated highways. But one autumn, I pulled into a cramped gas station in the middle of nowhere. The battered sign said Aldridge Service. Something about the crooked letters unsettled me, but I needed fuel. The inside was dim, smelling faintly of mold. An elderly attendant named Franklin dozed behind the register. I cleared my throat, and he jolted awake. He gave me a polite nod, but his expression soon shifted to dread. "You shouldn't be out there after dark," he muttered, eyes darting toward the windows. Pumping my gas, I noticed a dusty old RV parked on the far side. No lights on, no signs of life. I peered inside the RV's window, empty seats covered in stains. Suddenly, a hand smacked the glass from within. I jerked back, heart thudding. The blinds snapped shut, leaving me spooked. I returned to pay, but Franklin looked shaken. "Is someone living in that RV?" I asked, forcing a casual tone. He swallowed hard, then whispered, "It arrived 3 nights ago. Ain't seen a soul come out, except at odd hours. Strange noises, ... moans, rattling chains." My skin prickled. I tried to brush it off as superstition. Moments later, the station's lights flickered. A raspy groan emanated from somewhere outside. Franklin's face drained of color. Clutching my receipt, I hurried to my car. Before I could shut the door, I heard a metallic clang from inside the RV. against my instincts. I crept closer. The RV's door swung open with a slow creak, revealing darkness. A foul stench hit me, like decaying food and something else I couldn't identify. Summoning a shaky courage, I stepped in. My flashlight revealed tattered seats, scattered junk, and a thick chain bolted to the floor. That chain led to a contorted shape huddled in the corner, an emaciated figure, limbs twisted at unnatural angles. It lifted its head, exposing hollow eye sockets and a swollen tongue. My stomach churned. Suddenly, it lunged, yanking the chain taut. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. A keening wail filled the RV, echoing off the stained walls. I bolted outside, slamming the door. Trembling, I turned to see a face staring at me from the front window, gaunt features pressed against the glass, drooling. Then that face vanished into the darkness within. I sprinted back to the station, adrenaline roaring in my veins. Franklin looked at me knowingly. "Can't do anything for it now," he murmured. My mind spun with questions, guilt, and horror. Could that thing once have been human? Without a word, I dashed to my car. As I sped off, the RV's taillights suddenly flared. It lurched forward, engine roaring, headlights cutting across the lot. I watched in the mirror as it veered onto the highway behind me, swerving erratically. Franklin's station shrank into the distance, the sign flickering until it disappeared. The RV followed for miles, weaving from lane to lane. At times, I glimpsed that contorted figure pressed against the windshield, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Eventually, the vehicle drifted behind a bend, its lights fading. I drove on, heart hammering. I told no one. Who would believe that a chained horror dwelled in an abandoned RV, haunting a lonely station? But I do believe. Even now, whenever I see an old motorhome crawling down the road, I grip the wheel tight, half expecting to spot that grotesque silhouette glaring back at me. I'm Marina, and my wanderlust led me to cross remote highways in search of solitude and open skies. One evening, my car sputtered to a halt outside an old station marked Carter's Fuel. Desperate for help, I pushed the door open, stepping into a half-lit shop where a lanky man named Brock manned the counter. He nodded politely, but had an odd look in his eyes, as though he was forcing calm. I explained my car trouble, and he said a mechanic might be summoned from the nearest town, though it'd take hours. I decided to wait, sipping a flat soda from their cooler. The place smelled stale, and the hum of overhead lights resonated like a swarm of insects. Suddenly, I noticed movement in one of the cooler's glass reflections, a dark outline crossing behind the rows of snacks. Turning around, I found nothing there. My pulse quickened. Brock caught my gaze, murmuring that he'd been hearing things for weeks, scratching in the vents, footsteps after closing. Most employees quit, but he stayed, lacking options. Moments later, a loud thump echoed from the supply closet. We exchanged glances. Reluctantly, I joined him to investigate. Inside, boxers lay toppled. A pungent smell hit me, reminiscent of rotting meat. In the dim light, I saw a handprint smeared in what looked like blood across a metal shelf. We stepped back. A hiss emanated from beneath the sink. Brock aimed his flashlight, revealing a figure crouched low, its back turned. My heart raced. With an unnatural twist, it craned its neck toward us. I froze at the sight of milky white eyes and a sunken face, mouth stretched into a silent scream. Its skeletal arms ended in blackened nails, scraping the floor. Brock shouted, and the creature lunged. We scrambled out, slamming the door. Something pounded from inside, each hit making the shelves shudder. Panting, we realized the lock on the door was broken. Frantic, Brock pushed a heavy cabinet against it. We retreated to the shop, the overhead lights flickering. I tried calling for help, but my phone displayed no signal. Outside, wind whipped dust across the forecourt. Then the pounding stopped, replaced by eerie silence. Adrenaline buzzed in my veins, but part of me hoped the thing had fled. That hope was shattered when the metal cabinet screeched sideways. The door burst open, revealing the creature again. It moved with frantic speed, lurching into the store. I grabbed a broom handle in futile defense. Brock and I sidestepped its grasp, diving behind the counter. Its ragged breathing filled the stale air. In desperation, Brock flung a metal canister. It connected with the creature's shoulder, staggering it briefly. We seized the moment to dash outside. I fumbled for my car door, but remembered I had no power. The creature bounded through the broken doorway, scanning the lot with those horrifying eyes. We sprinted to Brock's old truck parked behind the station. He started it on the second try, engine coughing, headlights illuminating swirling dust. Through the rear window, I glimpsed that pale figure glaring at us, its features contorted in rage, but it made no sound, just a chilling stare that felt like a curse. We tore off into the night, leaving Carter's fuel behind. I never retrieved my own vehicle. Even now, I wonder if it's still there, luring drivers who need a mechanic. The nightmares remain vivid. That silent scream, the bloodied handprint, the relentless pounding from the closet. Some encounters you can't forget, and this was mine. I remember the night with unsettling clarity, even though I've spent years trying to erase it. My name is Vincent, and I worked a lonely graveyard shift at a gas station off Interstate 47, under buzzing fluorescents. The rows of snacks and soda seemed normal enough, but I sensed something off in the air. Our neon sign blinked erratically, and the security camera feeds kept cutting out. It was well past midnight when I heard a faint scraping noise near the rear supply closet. At first I thought it was just the wind rattling loose panels, but the sound grew louder, more persistent, like nails scraping across metal. Gripping a flashlight, I tiptoed down the narrow hallway, my heart hammering. Inside the closet, I noticed wet footprints trailing across the floor. They were long, inhuman, shaped almost like webbed hands. My breath caught in my throat. The overhead bulb flickered, casting my shadow in frantic bursts. Then a shape glided behind a stack of boxes. It looked hunched, but impossibly fast. I tried to follow, stepping carefully around soggy cardboard, but the closet was empty. Returning to the counter, I saw that the cameras had frozen on static again. A chill shot down my spine. Something had interfered with them. The scraping noise resumed, this time from behind the station's exterior wall. The fluorescent lights flickered, revealing glimpses of a figure with elongated arms, sliding past the windows. Its skin glistened with moisture, as though fresh from some dark lagoon. Panicked, I dialed the local sheriff. The line hissed with static, and I thought I heard a distant croak or gargle before it cut out entirely. I fumbled for my cell phone, no signal. Alone, I glanced outside, glimpsing that shape weaving through the gas pumps. Moving to the door, I locked it. A rational part of me insisted I was imagining things, but the footprints on the floor told a different story. Suddenly, the station lights blinked off, plunging me into darkness. The only illumination came from a single emergency lamp near the coffee machine, casting jagged shadows. My flashlight beam quivered over the aisles, revealing nothing. Then a wet slapping sound echoed from the glass doors. I spun around, heart pounding. Two gleaming eyes stared at me through the pane, set within a gaunt face with flaking scales. A gaping mouth emitted a low hiss. Its bony fingers tapped the glass, testing my makeshift barricade. I backed away, breath ragged. The thing slithered out of view, but I knew it was circling. Moments later, I heard a loud crash near the back exit. Grabbing a mop handle as a makeshift weapon, I crept toward the storeroom. Through a dusty window, I watched the shape hauling itself onto the roof, dripping water onto the gravel below. My pulse soared. If it got in through the vents, I stood no chance. Without warning, a ceiling tile caved in, showering me with debris. The creature dropped onto a shelf, knocking down cans that clattered across the tile floor. Its limbs bent unnaturally, as if jointed in reverse. I shuddered at the slime trailing down its torso. Slowly, it raised its head, those eerie eyes fixing on me. I could barely breathe. It lunged, letting out a guttural rasp. I swung the mop handle, striking its shoulder. It hissed and recoiled, giving me a precious second to dart past it. My only option was to flee outside. Racing through the main store, I ripped open the front door and sprinted into the lot. The overhead lights buzzed like angry hornets, illuminating puddles of stagnant water where it had slithered. My car was parked at the edge of the asphalt. Fumbling the keys, I glanced back just in time to see the creature emerge under the sign, droplets glistening on its scaly arms. It let out a shriek that made every hair on my neck stand on end. Adrenaline surging, I managed to start the engine and peel away, gravel spraying behind me by the time local deputies arrived. The station showed no sign of forced entry, nor any trace of that aquatic horror. They chalked it up to stress and overactive imagination. Yet I know what I saw. Even now, when I pass a lonely gas station at night, I scan the pavement for wet footprints. Sometimes, I hear that scraping in my dreams, a horrible reminder that something from the murky depths once found its way onto dry land. They call me Raymond, and I used to drive night routes delivering supplies across several states. One evening, my rig rumbled low on fuel near a place called Raven's Gulch, so I pulled into a dilapidated gas station. The pumps looked rusted, the storefront windows grimy, and a half-broken sign flickered overhead. Inside, a single bulb buzzed like an insect, revealing a cluttered counter strewn with papers. A teenage clerk with pale skin, his namatag read Sawyer, stood there, seemingly startled by my arrival. I offered a nod and asked for directions, but he responded with nervous gestures. His voice came out trembling, as though something weighed on him. While I grabbed a coffee from the ancient machine in the corner, the lights dimmed. A tremor rattled the metal shelves, causing candy bars to tumble. Sawyer locked eyes with me, sweat beading on his forehead. "Don't go outside," he whispered. Confused, I peeked through the window anyway. Darkness cloaked the pumps, but something large moved between them, its silhouette, unnaturally tall, limbs bent, as though broken. I asked Sawyer what it was, but he just shook his head. Moments later, the lights fluttered back on. The shape vanished. I couldn't decide if I believed what I saw. Grabbing a flashlight, I figured I'd top off my tank and leave. Sawyer tried to stop me, muttering that it would only appear again. Brushing aside his warnings, I stepped out under the buzzing neon. The night was still, no wind to rustle, even a scrap of litter. About halfway to my truck, I heard a scraping sound on metal. I spun around to find a slender figure perched on the roof of the station. Its limbs stretched too long, fingers like hooks. Moonlight glinted off a featureless face, a smooth mask of pale skin. My heart pounded as it dropped silently to the pavement. Its limbs folded, spider-like, and I realized it was studying me. Terror rooted me in place, then it lunged. A shriek tore from my throat, but I managed to leap behind my truck's open door. The creature's spindly arms raked the metal, leaving deep gashes. Sawyer burst from the store, yelling for me to get back inside. The creature pivoted toward him, letting out a keening wail that rattled the windows. I dashed toward the station, practically dragging Sawyer in with me. We slammed the door, flipping the lock as the thing skittered across the concrete. Its featureless face pressed against the glass, a faint hiss emanating from behind the smooth exterior. For a moment, it just stared, as if measuring our fear. Then, with a swift motion, it smashed the glass. Shards flew everywhere. Sawyer screamed, and the lights flickered. I grabbed an old tire iron off a shelf, brandishing it like some feeble sword. The creature crept in, limbs contorting, its eyeless, head swiveling. Suddenly a siren wailed in the distance. Local authorities. Perhaps. The creature hissed again, then scrambled back into the night, vanishing behind the pumps. Disbelieving my own senses, I pushed Sawyer to come with me. We bolted. For my rig. Whatever that thing was, I wasn't staying to find out. We raced off, headlights illuminating nothing but empty road. When the sheriff finally showed up, the station was in ruins, the door destroyed, yet there was no trace of the intruder. Sawyer was whisked away for questioning, and I ended up telling a tale no one believed. Since that night, I've changed. Routes entirely. Whenever I pass a lone gas station now, my heart clenches at every shifting shadow. Sometimes, I still see that faceless silhouette perched high on a rooftop, waiting for the next foolish soul to appear. I'm Julian, and I started as a radiology intern at Whitbridge Hospital, a place boasting state-of-the-art equipment. My mentor, Dr. Everett, was known for late-night MRI scans on critical patients. One stormy evening, she asked me to help with a peculiar case, a patient who'd arrived with unexplained seizures and half-remembered nightmares. We wheeled the unconscious man into the MRI suite. Rain pounded on the roof, and the fluorescent lights flickered as lightning struck nearby. While Dr. Everett prepped the machine, I placed the patient's file aside. It mentioned no family, no identification, just scribbled notes about strange symbols carved into his forearms. A creeping unease settled in my stomach. Halfway through the scan, the power fluctuated. The MRI console emitted bursts of static. Dr. Everett frowned at the monitor, adjusting knobs, but the images flickered with bizarre distortions. Suddenly, the screen displayed a Fisa monstrous visage with hollowed cheeks and pitch-black eyes. It vanished in an instant, replaced by normal brain imaging. I blinked, doubting what I saw. Then the patient began to convulse within the machine. We rushed to stop the scan, but the control panel wouldn't respond. He jolted upright, eyes rolling back, chanting an eerie guttural phrase. My spine tingled. The overhead lights dimmed, and a foul odor seeped into the room, like sulfur and decaying flesh, with a final snap of electricity. The MRI shut down, releasing the patient. He collapsed onto the stretcher. We scrambled to revive him, but then Dr. Everett gasped. The man's forearm carvings now glowed faintly in the darkness, as though lit from within. A harsh wind, impossible indoors, whipped around us. Instruments clattered to the floor, rolling in chaotic circles. The patient's eyes snapped open. He grabbed my wrist with an iron grip, murmuring a phrase that sounded ancient. My vision swam with horrifying images. Dark corridors, hooded figures, chanting in unison. Some unspeakable entity rose from a pool of black liquid. I felt my sanity teeter. Dr. Everett pried him off me, injecting a sedative. The storm outside intensified, windows rattling violently. Finally, the man went limp, the glowing marks dimming. We secured him and rushed to call for backup. A moment later, the monitors flatlined. By the time other staff arrived, the patient was dead. Administration demanded we keep silent. They labeled it a freak electrical surge, an unavoidable tragedy. Yet Dr. Everett and I couldn't ignore the unnatural circumstances. We studied the MRI data, finding inexplicable frames, glimpses of a horned silhouette, cryptic runes scattered across the scan. It was as if something from beyond had seeped into our reality. I left Whitbridge soon after, haunted by nightmares of that chanting voice. Sometimes, I wake in a cold sweat, convinced I see faint glowing lines etched onto my own arms. Perhaps I only imagine it, but I can't dismiss the thought that whatever invaded our MRI suite might not be done with me or with this world. They call me Meredith. I was once a resident surgeon at Oakwood Memorial, a place renowned for advanced medicine. My confidence soared there, until a chilling incident left me questioning reality. It happened in the old recovery wing, long sealed, off due to structural issues. Late one night, I had to retrieve supplies from that restricted area and order from a supervisor, who claimed we were short on certain equipment. As I stepped through double doors marked authorized personnel only, a wave of stale air enveloped me. The corridor lights flickered erratically. The walls bore cracks and peeling paint, revealing water damage. I passed abandoned rooms, each containing broken beds and dusty monitors. Then, from one of these rooms, I heard ragged breathing. Cautiously, I peered inside. An operating table stood under a dim emergency light. On it lay a patient's form draped in a blood-stained sheet. My pulse surged. The hospital record stated this wing was empty. Approaching slowly, I called out, but no reply came suddenly. The figure twitched. Its hand emerged from beneath the sheet, reaching for me. I stumbled back in horror. The patient's eyes blinked open, revealing mismatched irises. "Help me," came a rasping plea. Torn between terror and duty, I moved closer to check vitals. As I reached for the wrist, a horrid jolt shot up my arm like an electric shock. The overhead light buzzed, flickered, and everything went black. When the light returned, the table was empty, the sheet folded neatly. My heart hammered. Had I imagined it? Footsteps echoed behind me. I spun around to see a silhouette in a surgeon's coat, face hidden in shadows. The figure grasped a rusted scalpel, stepping closer with each heartbeat. I demanded it identify itself, but it only tilted its head, as if studying me. Panic flared. I backed away, only to find the door locked. The figure laughed a hollow, echoing sound that set my nerves on edge. Suddenly, it rushed forward, scalpel raised. I let out a cry, diving aside. My knee hit the floor painfully. When I looked up, the figure was gone. The door swung open on its own, revealing the hallway again. Shaken, I fled back to the main ward, breath ragged. No one believed my story. The staff insisted that old wing was locked and vacant, but I couldn't forget the image of that patient, calling for help, or the phantom surgeon stalking me with a scalpel. Determined to uncover the truth, I searched archived files. I found references to an infamous doctor who once conducted unauthorized procedures there. Rumors claimed he lost his mind after a series of patient deaths and simply vanished. I resigned soon after. Even the normal wards felt tainted by the memory of that night. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the morning, I still see that abandoned corridor in my dreams. I run my gloved hands along the walls, and then I hear the screech of a scalpel on metal. A twisted laugh reverberates behind me, and I know I'll never escape the ghosts of Oakwood Memorial. I'm Atticus, a traveling paramedic, who's been stationed temporarily at Greenvale General. The building's facade seemed normal enough, but there was an unsettling rumor. Something sinister haunted the hospital chapel, a place usually reserved for solace. One rainy evening, I learned the truth in the most harrowing way. I'd just finished a frantic earth shift and sought refuge in the chapel, hoping for a moment of peace. Soft lamp glow revealed rows of chairs and a small altar adorned with artificial flowers. The stale scent of wax lingered in the air as thunder rattled the windows. I noticed a flicker in the corner, like a figure standing in the shadows. "Hello," I called gently, expecting a visitor in prayer. The figure stepped forward, into the weak light. It wore a dark cloak, its hood obscuring most of its face. Yet I caught a glimpse of hollow cheeks and eyes that looked unnervingly vacant. My instincts prickled, and I realized I wasn't alone in that sacred space. Rain pelted the stained glass, windows harder, and a sudden gust extinguished the lamps, plunging us into darkness. I scrabbled for my phone, using its screen as a feeble light source. The figure stood mere steps away now, silent as a grave. My pulse throbbed in my ears. Then, in a voice that crackled like static, it whispered, "Leave now." A jolt of fear shot through me. I tried to back away, but my heel caught on a chair leg, sending me crashing to the floor. My phone skittered across the chapel. Thunder boomed, illuminating the hooded figure in a white flash. It knelt down, revealing a face both gaunt and twisted, as though warped by agony. "You can't save them," it hissed, voice dripping with despair. Behind me, I heard the chapel doors slam shut on their own. The figure extended a skeletal hand toward my forehead, and an overwhelming cold seized me. Vivid, nightmarish visions filled my mind. Patients screaming on gurneys, doctors weeping over lost causes, souls wandering corridors in endless torment. My heart pounded so hard, I thought my chest would burst. Summoning all my willpower, I tore free from the figure's grasp, scrambling to my feet. The lamps reignited, bathing the space in trembling light. But the hooded presence had vanished. My legs shook as I approached the doors, trying to yank them open. They finally gave way, releasing me into the hallway. Gasping for breath, I stumbled into a passing doctor who looked alarmed by my pale, sweat-soaked face. When I explained what happened, he simply shook his head. "That chapel's been off limits at night for years," he said quietly, hinting that I wasn't the first to encounter such horror. Other staff members had reported ghostly visions of a hooded reaper or guardian spirit, warning them of impending doom. Some believed it collected the souls of those who couldn't be saved. I haven't set foot in that chapel since. Even walking past it fills me with dread, as if the figure waits just beyond the door, eager to show me more horrors. Sometimes, when storms roll through, I catch a glimpse of black fabric drifting across the threshold. I squeeze my eyes shut and hurry on. Whatever resides within those walls is no ordinary spirit, and I fear it might someday lay its chilling hand upon me again. I am Theodore, and I used to shrug off hospital rumors as mere folklore. That changed when I started my night shift as a volunteer in St. Helens Medical Center. The corridors were harshly lit, the disinfectant smell clinging to my nostrils. On my first night, an elderly patient named Mrs. Porter told me about a ghostly child roaming the pediatric wing. I laughed politely, believing she was delirious from her medication. Around midnight, I was delivering supplies to the pediatric ward. The overhead fluorescents buzzed, flickering intermittently, casting shadows that danced along the pale green walls. Suddenly, I saw movement. A small figure darted across the hallway. My pulse quickened, yet I convinced myself it was just a nurse's aide. Curiosity nagged at me, so I followed. The corridor led to a dimly lit lounge, where stuffed animals lined the shelves. There, in the glow of a single lamp, stood a boy in a hospital gown. His head was shaved, revealing thin scars across his scalp. When he turned, his eyes locked onto mine. A chill rippled through me as I realized he was slightly transparent, like a flickering image on an old TV. I tried to speak, but my throat closed. The boy raised one hand, beckoning silently. My mind screamed at me to run, yet my feet inched forward. He led me to a door at the end of the lounge, one marked storage. The handle felt freezing beneath my fingertips. Inside, I found a battered wooden toy box and a large plastic bag filled with dusty documents. Kneeling down, I rummaged through the files. They detailed the final days of a child named Martin who'd succumbed to a terminal illness decades ago. The records mentioned suspicious negligence, staff errors, even pleas from the boy's parents that were ignored. My chest felt tight, a wave of guilt washing over me, though I had no direct link to the tragedy. I heard a faint sobbing behind me. Turning, I saw the boy's spectral form trembling, tears shimmering on his cheeks. Instinctively, I reached out. My hand passed through him, sending an icy current up my arm. He mouthed words I couldn't hear, his gaze brimming with sorrow. Then the lounge lights flickered, and he vanished. A sudden crash jolted me. The toy box had toppled over by itself. Heart pounding, I picked it up. Inside lay crumpled letters addressed to hospital administration, all unanswered. As I stood, the door slammed, locking me in. Darkness swallowed me. Panicking, I pounded on the door, but no one answered. My phone flashlight illuminated faint footprints on the tiled floor, each step leading back toward the lounge. Gathering courage, I followed them until they stopped at the wall. The corridor felt different now, longer, quieter, as though the hospital itself had shifted around me. Distantly, I heard a child's whisper calling my name. The overhead lights sputtered back on, and the door clicked open. I stumbled into the hallway, disoriented. A passing nurse scolded me for wandering off, but I barely heard her words. My mind spun with images of that sad boy and the heartbreaking files. I tried to tell her, but all that came out was a shaky breath. Days later, I found the resolve to mention the encounter to my supervisor. She grimaced and said, "We don't talk about that. Too many staff reported seeing him." She warned me that the boy's appearance foreshadowed turmoil. The authorities had hushed the case long ago, but some secrets never rest. I quit soon after. I still have nightmares. I'm trapped in that lounge, hearing distant sobs echo off sterile walls. The boy stands before me, eyes full of despair, guiding me toward more hidden truths. Sometimes, I jolt awake, gasping for breath, convinced I see him flicker in the corner of my bedroom. Perhaps he's pleading for justice, or maybe he's forever lost, wandering those halls in search of solace that will never come. My name is Georgina, and last month, I joined the nursing staff at Morningside Hospital. I'd heard rumors about strange incidents on the 4th floor, things moving on their own, unexplained shrieks in the night. I used to chuckle at ghost stories, but the laughter died on my lips when I worked my first overnight shift. It was 3 in the morning when an emergency alarm rang from room 408. My heart pounded as I raced down the hallway. Inside, the patient's bed lay empty, the sheets tattered and strewn across the floor. The room reeked of antiseptic, mixed with a dank odor that made me gag. Flicking on the overhead light, I saw deep scratch marks etched into the wall, as though by massive claws. Alarmed, I ran to the nurse's station to call security. That's when I heard low growling echo down the corridor. My pulse thundered. A harsh clang rang out, and I watched in horror as a steel gurney slid across the floor, with no one pushing it. I dared to inch closer, the hallway lights flickering, giving me fleeting glimpses of something crouched behind the gurney. I peered around the metal frame, nearly dropping my flashlight at the sight. A creature hunched on all fours, its pale skin stretched tight over protruding bones, and its face half covered by an oxygen mask. 2 sunken eyes glared at me, full of an animalistic rage. A chilling hiss escaped from behind the plastic mask, sending cold sweat down my back. Before I could react, it sprang forward, slamming the gurney into me. I stumbled, catching my arm on a protruding corner, pain flashing hot through my veins. The creature scuttled along the ceiling, its nails scraping the plaster. I screamed, staggering away as overhead lights cracked and rained down shards of glass. Desperate, I bolted into a supply closet, barricading the door with a heavy cart. My breath came in ragged gasps. Through the thin door, I heard it sniffing, nails scraping, searching. Each scratch sent shivers through my body. My mind spun. Was this patient mutated somehow, or was it something else entirely? Minutes felt like hours. Eventually, the scraping faded, replaced by distant alarms and frantic footsteps. I mustered enough courage to peek outside. The corridor lay wrecked, flickering lights, shattered equipment, bloody streaks on the tiles. Security guards rushed in, exchanging panicked shouts about an intruder or wild animal, but there was no sign of the creature. I explained what I saw, but my words made no sense, even to me. The hospital administration hushed the incident, claiming a patient had become violent. Yet the scratch marks overhead made no logical sense for any human. Other nurses whispered about a hidden lab that once existed beneath the hospital. rumored to perform horrific experiments. Though shaken, I remained on staff. Every night, I feel a prickling fear that it lurks in the rafters, biting. It's time. Sometimes I hear that same low growl when I pass room 408, even though it's remained unoccupied since that night. I can't forget those sunken eyes, or the rancid stench. Part of me wonders if it's still crawling through the ventilation shafts, searching for the next victim it can claim in the shadows of Morningside Hospital. I'm Benjamin, and the highway has always been my escape until that fateful night when the ordinary morphed into the inexplicable. I had been driving home after a long day when I noticed an unusual anomaly, a series of abandoned vehicles lining the roadside, as if dropped there by unseen hands. The eerie stillness of the highway, combined with an oppressive fog, sent shivers down my spine. My pulse quickened as I passed by, each car a silent witness to a story best left untold. A sense of foreboding urged me to pull over near one of the vehicles. I stepped out and, in the fading light, inspected a rusted sedan. The interior was coated in a fine layer of dust, and scattered personal items hinted at a sudden departure. I felt an inexplicable pull toward one object, a faded photograph of a young woman labeled Charlotte. Her eyes seemed to plead with me, imploring me to remember something long forgotten. Without warning, I heard distant footsteps behind me, but every time I turned, there was nothing but the oppressive mist, compelled by curiosity and an unshakable dread. I returned to my car and resumed my journey. The highway gave way to a narrow rural road that led me toward a dense forest. With every mile, the weight of the mystery grew heavier, and I felt as if I were driving toward a destiny I couldn't escape. In the forest's edge, where the trees grew so thick that light was a rare commodity, I encountered a decrepit cabin. Its windows were dark voids, and the door hung loosely on its hinges, creaking in the cold wind. Inside the cabin, remnants of a bygone era lay scattered: old diaries, broken furniture, and cryptic symbols etched into the walls. As I flipped through one of the diaries, I discovered entries detailing the tragic fate of a family haunted by inexplicable phenomena. The recurring mention of Charlotte struck me as though the past and present were colliding. An oppressive presence seemed to swirl in the stagnant air, and I felt eyes watching my every move. In the midst of that chilling encounter, the cabin door slammed shut, trapping me in a prison of my own making. Desperate to escape, I burst out of the cabin and raced back into the forest's depths. The trees loomed like silent judges as I navigated the labyrinth of shadows and twisting paths. At a small clearing, the remnants of a stone monument inscribed with a name, Fiona, offered a momentary pause, a final resting place for a soul lost in time. There, as the wind whispered secrets among the leaves, I realized that my encounter on the highway had been merely the prelude to a deeper, more harrowing truth. In that forest, amidst memories and spectral echoes, I vowed to carry the legacy of those forgotten and unravel the mystery that had claimed them. I was driving along the desolate highway at dusk when I first sensed something was off. My name is Ethan, and that night, the road seemed to whisper secrets I couldn't ignore. The hum of my engine was the only sound as I merged onto the lonely stretch of asphalt. I'd left behind a chaotic day in the city, desperate for solitude, when I noticed a dim light flickering in the distance. As I neared, I saw a battered truck parked on the shoulder, its windows dark and inviting. I slowed down, curiosity mixing with an inexplicable dread. I pulled up beside the truck and, against my better judgment, approached it. The metallic scent of rust and old oil filled the air as I stepped out, my heart pounding in a rhythm I couldn't control. A chill ran down my spine when I heard a low moan emanating from within. My trembling hand reached for the door handle, and as it creaked open, I caught a glimpse of something that defied explanation: a figure, transparent and glowing, silently pleading with eyes full of sorrow. The apparition's face was hauntingly familiar, yet I couldn't recall ever meeting it. Frozen in disbelief, I stumbled back and retreated to my car. The highway had transformed. The once sterile road now pulsed with an eerie luminescence. I drove on, the spectral image etched in my mind, until the asphalt gave way to gravel. The landscape shifted. Roadside trees arched overhead like silent sentinels. I soon found myself at the edge of a vast, forbidding forest. The towering pines loomed as if guarding long-forgotten secrets, and the wind carried murmurs of lost souls. Inside the forest, the air was damp and heavy with decay. Every step I took felt as if I were trespassing in a domain where time had long since withered away. In the dim light, I encountered relics of an abandoned settlement, a rusted sign reading Oliver's Rest, and remnants of a fire pit, still smoldering with embers that refused to die. I pressed on, desperate for answers, yet terrified of what lurked beyond the next bend. The spectral presence, now an obsession, haunted every shadow, every rustle of leaves. I finally reached a clearing where the forest opened to reveal an ancient stone monument draped in moss. At that moment, the ghostly figure from the truck reappeared, its eyes brimming with silent anguish. I felt an overwhelming compulsion to uncover its story, as though my destiny was intertwined with the mysteries of that cursed night. Trembling, I knelt before the monument, vowing to remember the spectral warning and honor the lost soul's plea. In that forest, beneath a canopy of haunted whispers, my life was forever altered. My name is Amelia, and I never imagined a routine drive on the highway could lead to such dread. It began on a rainy evening when I left my friend's house, seeking refuge from a storm. The highway stretched out before me like an endless ribbon of wet despair. Raindrops blurred the headlights, and the rhythmic patter on my windshield created an almost hypnotic cadence. As I navigated the slick curves, I noticed a strange figure standing by the roadside, dressed in a vintage coat, its eyes reflecting a sorrow that chilled my blood. Against my instincts, I slowed and rolled down the window. The figure didn't speak, merely raised a trembling hand in silent plea. I couldn't shake the feeling that this person was not what they appeared to be. The storm grew fiercer, and as lightning split the sky, the figure vanished. My pulse raced as I continued down the highway, each mile intensifying the sense of foreboding. I began to suspect that the rain itself was concealing more than just water. It was a shroud for a hidden terror. Eventually, the asphalt gave way to a winding country road leading to an expansive forest. I parked on the side and stepped out into the torrential rain, drawn inexplicably toward the murmur of the trees. The forest was dark, the rain muted into a drumming symphony on the leaves. With each step, the air grew colder, and I felt the oppressive weight of unseen eyes watching me. In a clearing, I discovered a peculiar relic, a shattered pocket watch, engraved with the name Gideon. Its ticking, though broken, echoed in the silence. Each pulse a reminder of time lost. Haunted by the spectral encounter on the highway, I continued deeper into the forest. The path became erratic, overgrown with vines and tangled roots. Every rustle in the underbrush made my heart leap. Then, in a moment of bone-chilling terror, I heard soft, desperate whispers surrounding me. They were indistinct, as if carried on the wind from another realm. The voices merged into a mournful chorus that spoke of betrayal and loss. I knew that the figure I'd seen earlier was somehow connected to this place, a tragic soul cursed to wander between worlds. At last I reached a clearing where ancient oak trees encircled a forgotten graveyard. In that eerie tableau, I felt the full force of the horror that had stalked me from highway to forest. The rain ceased, leaving an oppressive stillness that magnified every heartbeat. I knelt beside a weathered tombstone, silently promising to seek the truth behind the haunted figure and the cryptic legacy of Gideon. In that frozen moment, amidst spectral echoes and the rustle of ancient leaves, I realized that some mysteries are destined to remain forever unsolved. My name is Charlotte, and I once believed that a drive on a quiet highway was the perfect antidote to life's chaos. That belief shattered one night when I found myself hurtling down an isolated road under a sky heavy with storm clouds. The highway, slick with rain and lit only by my headlights, soon became a stage for a terror I could scarcely comprehend. A sudden flash of lightning revealed a peculiar sight. A series of inexplicable tire tracks veering off the road, as if drawn by an invisible hand. I slowed my car, heart pounding as I tried to piece together the strange phenomenon. Compelled to investigate, I pulled over near a stretch of deserted pavement and stepped out into the lashing rain. I had barely reached the curb when I noticed a shadow moving swiftly among the puddles. A figure, cloaked in darkness with eyes that glinted like shards of glass. I couldn't discern any features, only the overwhelming sense that this presence was not of this world. Its silent pursuit sent waves of terror through me, and I dashed back to my car. The memory of that piercing gaze seared into my mind. With trembling determination, I resumed driving, the highway now a blurred montage of rain, fear, and unanswered questions. Soon the road narrowed, giving way to a serpentine path leading into a vast, foreboding forest. The trees loomed like ancient titans, their branches clawing at the heavy sky. I parked at the forest's entrance and stepped into a realm where nature itself seemed to mourn. The forest floor was littered with decaying leaves and shattered dreams, each step echoing the sound of my rapid heartbeat. In the depths of the forest, I discovered an abandoned clearing dominated by a crumbling stone altar. Scrawled upon its surface were cryptic symbols and a single name, Harper. The air was thick with the coppery scent of old blood, and the whisper of secrets too terrible to voice aloud. As I circled the altar, a spectral wind picked up, stirring the fallen leaves into a frenzied dance. The presence from the highway seemed to manifest here, its energy mingling with the raw, ancient power of the forest. I felt as though I were caught in a time loop of despair, destined to witness a ritual that defied mortal understanding. With every fiber of my being, I resisted the pull of that dark force. I retreated slowly, never once daring to glance back at the altar or the swirling shadows that surrounded it. But as I reached the forest's edge, a final echoing wail followed me, a mournful dirge that promised the terror was far from over. That night, I learned that the highway's mysterious omen had led me into a labyrinth of ancient curses and spectral rituals. In that forsaken forest, my soul was indelibly marked by a darkness that defied explanation. I'm Daniel, and nothing prepared me for the night I encountered true malevolence. Driving along the open highway, under a starless sky, I felt the freedom of the road until an unsettling vibration in the air disrupted the silence. As I cruised through the night, the asphalt shimmered strangely beneath my tires, as if concealing a secret. Then I noticed a peculiar sight, a small antique car parked awkwardly at the roadside, its engine off and its windows fogged. The name? Isabella was etched delicately on its door, a detail so out of place it made my skin crawl. Against every instinct, I pulled over. I stepped out into the chill and approached the car, my breath visible in the cold night air. The interior was adorned with relics from another Tima porcelain doll, with cracked features, faded letters in a neat cursive, and a photograph of a family I'd never known. I sensed that the car was a time capsule of forgotten grief. As I reached to touch the steering wheel, the silence shattered with a distant scream that reverberated through the still night. I jerked my hand back, adrenaline surging as I realized that some force was urging me to uncover a sinister history. I hurried back to my vehicle and resumed my journey, my mind in turmoil. The highway soon gave way to a narrow road that slithered toward an ominous forest. With each passing mile, the landscape grew wilder, the trees denser, until the modern world was nothing more than a fading memory. Arriving at the forest's edge, I parked and stepped into a realm that felt like the domain of nightmares. The forest was alive with rustling leaves and unspoken warnings. I could almost hear the echoes of long-forgotten voices pleading for release. Deep within the forest, I found myself before a crumbling mausoleum enveloped in ivy. The inscription Jasper was barely visible, worn away by the relentless passage of time. Inside, the air was thick with decay and the unmistakable aura of dread. I wandered the shadowy corridors, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. Then, in a final, heart-stopping moment, the antique car from the highway materialized beside me, a spectral echo of the past, its headlights flickering like dying embers. I felt the overwhelming presence of a malevolent force that had lured me from the safe familiarity of the road to this nightmarish sanctuary. In that haunted mausoleum, as the full gravity of my situation settled in, I understood that I was entangled in a horror beyond mortal reckoning. The forest seemed to pulse with an ancient, unspeakable power, and I knew that leaving would not erase what I had seen. My journey from the highway to the forest had become a descent into darkness, a merging of past and present that would haunt my dreams forever. I left that place with a burden of terror and a resolve to remember every details, so that others might be warned of the hidden evils lurking just beyond the familiar light of the road.